Funding for the North Carolina Institute of Political Leadership Hometown Debate is provided by viewers like you, with additional funding provided by North Carolina's Electric Cooperatives, the John William Pope Foundation, State Employees Association of North Carolina, North Carolina Association of Defense Attorneys, and North Carolina Advocates for Justice.
The candidates for North Carolina Attorney General debate the issues next.
The North Carolina Institute of Political Leadership Hometown Debate is a production of UNC-TV in association with the Institute of Political Leadership and the Asheboro Randolph Chamber of Commerce.
Hello, I'm Kelly McCullen with the North Carolina Channel. We are at Asheboro's Sunset Theater for the North Carolina Attorney General candidates debate between Republican Buck Newton and Democrat Josh Stein. Gentlemen, welcome to the stage.
Thank you, Kelly.
This event is presented by the North Carolina Institute of Political Leadership and the Asheboro Randolph Chamber of Commerce. Annette Jordan of the Asheboro Courier-Tribune and John Nagy of The Pilot will ask all the questions tonight. I will hopefully keep things constrained by time. Each candidate, you receive 3 minutes for an opening statement by coin flip. Mr. Newton, you're first.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you all for having us here tonight. I'm glad we got the opportunity to speak to you. And I want to thank my opponent, Senator Stein, for being here and agreeing to debate with us about these important issues in the Attorney General's office and that face the people of North Carolina. So my name is Buck Newton, and I'm asking for your vote for Attorney General. And I want to tell you why. Our state needs an Attorney General who is not afraid to stand for the people of North Carolina, someone who will stand for the rule of law without a political agenda, because this is the foundation of our freedom. You see, the rule of law helps our families stay safe. It helps our businesses thrive. It's the foundation of our freedom. We need an Attorney General who will stand with law enforcement, someone who has the backbone to stand for them no matter what happens. Even when it's political correctness comes along, you need an Attorney General who is not afraid to stand the heat and will stand up for what's right. Small business needs an Attorney General who will stand up to fight government interference, whether that's coming from Washington, D.C. or anywhere else. And families need an Attorney General who will keep them safe from hardened criminals and anyone else who would do them harm. Friends, we live in a time of historic frustration with government. Why is that? I believe the American people are right to be so frustrated because the rule of law has become secondary to political ambitions and political correctness. Far too often that is the case. Too many politicians in our society cave at the first complaint or hide their true agenda. Nowadays, political correctness asks us to set aside the rule of law, set aside our safety, all to avoid offending anyone. Political ambitions determine which laws are defended and which laws are ignored. We can do better, but only if we elect leaders who will fight for you and not for themselves. The office of Attorney General is the last place for an ambitious politician. The Attorney General you hire this November must be someone who will work hard every day looking out for you, making sure you're treated fairly. You deserve an Attorney General who will serve with judgment, thoroughness, and backbone. My track record proves I will put the public interest first and never buckle to special interests. I have the backs of our state law enforcement, and I will not back down from a fight when truth is at stake. That's why I've been endorsed by the North Carolina Troopers Association, the Fraternal Order of Police, and why I was named Legislator of the Year by Mothers Against Drunk Driving. I was born in Wilson and raised there. My wife Hope and I have raised our 3 children here in North Carolina, and we know the good people of this state are its greatest strength. I spent my adult life, serving my community, and I would be honored to fight for you as your Attorney General. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newton. Mr. Stein, your opening statement, sir.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the Institute of Political Leadership and the sponsors, our moderator and panel, and Senator Newton. But most importantly, I want to thank you all, the audience, both here and at home, for your interest in this race. I'm Josh Stein, and I'm running for Attorney General to protect North Carolina families. I grew up in Charlotte and Chapel Hill. I went away for school and have called Raleigh my home since 1995. My wife Anna and I celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary this summer. We have 3 kids. They all attend North Carolina public schools, just like Anna and I did. I have served the better part of 4 terms in the state Senate and practiced law. Before I was sworn into the state Senate, I did a variety of different things. I was a high school economics teacher, an economic developer, legal counsel in the United States Senate, and for 8 years, I was a senior deputy attorney general in the North Carolina Department of Justice. So while I've had a number of jobs, I've had one career: public service, and one goal, which is to help people improve their own lives. That's why I'm running for Attorney General. Before I was elected to the state Senate, I served in the North Carolina Department of Justice. I protected North Carolina families. We took on sexual predators who used social networking sites to prey on kids. And we went after telemarketing scammers that would target our parents and grandparents. I helped run the payday lenders that were charging loan shark interest rates on working families, 400 to 500% out of the state of North Carolina. I will not need any on-the-job training as Attorney General because I already know the job. In my time in the state Senate, I've continued my work protecting families. I wrote the School Safety Act to keep kids safe at school. I led efforts to put more violent criminals behind bars by expanding our DNA database. I worked to make our roads safer from drunk driving, and MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, honored me with its Legislator of the Year award last year. I've strengthened laws to protect women and children from domestic violence. Because of my work fighting for public safety, our campaign has been endorsed by 2 major police groups, including the state's largest, the Police Benevolent Association. But tonight, the support I want to earn is yours. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to this interesting exchange.
Candidates, we move to the question phase now. You'll each receive the same question. You'll each receive 2 minutes to answer the question. You can each rebut each other one time. You can't rebut yourself. Quite impossible. First question goes to Buck Newton tonight. It's from Miss Annette Jordan.
Some critics say that Attorney General Roy Cooper chooses which laws he will defend. Do you agree with Cooper's actions, specifically on HB 2 and voter ID? If you agree, what factors would you use in deciding not to defend a law?
Thank you very much for the question. Let me be very clear. Absolutely not. I do not agree with his decision not to defend the laws of this state. Both of those laws were duly passed by the legislature. In the case of voter ID, this is a law that is similar to 28 other states in the United States. It's been upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court. It's very obviously for political reasons that he's decided not to defend these laws. This started with him in 2011 with another bill that was called HB 2, and that was a law that ordered him, or asked him, or directed him, I guess is a better way to say it, to challenge Obamacare, which has cost the state millions of dollars, is costing jobs left and right. We're about to lose all the insurance providers in the state, and this is happening across the country. And he refused to do that. So I don't agree with that position of his. I think that I want the people to understand that as an Attorney General, your job is to defend the laws of this state as the Chief Law Enforcement Officer. Your job is to look out for the best interest of the state and not to look for a political decision. It's a very dangerous thing, and this is a point that I would like to make very clear. It's a very dangerous thing for the concept of rule of law if you have an Attorney General deciding which laws that he or she just choose and pick whatever fits their agenda. As a state senator, it's not how I would vote on the bill that would make that determination. It's the interest of the people of North Carolina and whether it complies with the Constitution of the United States and North Carolina.
Mr. Stein.
Thank you. I will follow my oath. The oath of Attorney General is to defend the United States Constitution and the laws and Constitution of North Carolina that are not inconsistent with the United States Constitution. That's what I'm going to do. That's what the rule of law requires. And the role of an Attorney General is different from that of a legislator. I've been a legislator, and I have stood up and argued loudly against some of what I thought were very bad ideas of the legislature. But the role of the Attorney General is not to make policy, but it's to defend the state. So when the state is sued, then the Attorney General will defend that. Now, of course, it has to be consistent with the United States Constitution. And in the instance of this anti-voter law, voter ID was 6 pages out of 60 pages, so it was much more than that. A unanimous panel of federal judges at the highest level in our judiciary below the Supreme Court determined that the legislature acted with discriminatory intent, in fact, with surgical precision to target African American voters. The Attorney General defended that law for 3 years, defended it all the way through trial, defended it at state court, defended it to the federal court. When you've been told that you're denying people their constitutional rights, it's an appropriate time to step back. That's the discretion the Attorney General has to respect the U.S. Constitution.
Mr. Newton, rebuttal, 1 minute.
Thank you. I appreciate hearing that from my opponent, Senator Stein. I do believe that the oath of Attorney General is important. It is very important that the Attorney General fulfill his duty or her duty to defend the state. But it's inconceivable to me how laws that are the same in 28 other states are somehow now discriminatory in North Carolina. It sounds a whole lot to me like just in the nick of time, right before the election, our current Attorney General decided that politics were more important. That's why he didn't defend the law of North Carolina. Voter ID has been upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court. Many states in the United States don't even have early voting. North Carolina does. This was a very good law, very common sense law that's supported by almost 70% of North Carolina, and he should have done his job.
Next question, staying with you, Mr. Stein.
Yes,
John Nagy.
Senator, consumer welfare as it relates to internet security is becoming a significant issue as domestic and international hacking attempts grow. The purpose behind these hacks range from theft of personally identifiable information that can be resold to just simple criminal mischief. Discuss how you, as the Attorney General, can direct the Department of Justice to better identify vulnerabilities and safeguard North Carolina government and residents' data.
Thank you. Preserving people's privacy, preserving their personal information is a high priority for me. In fact, I was the one who wrote the Identity Theft Protection Act of 2005, and the legislature enacted that into law. When I was the Senior Deputy Attorney General, I headed the Consumer Protection Division, and that was my charge, was to draft the most comprehensive protective piece of legislation so that whether it's a company or business, they have to meet the highest of standards to protect our data. Because if our data gets stolen by thieves, whether they're in Russia, Nigeria, or even in the United States, it can wreak havoc on our lives. And so protecting identity, having credit bureaus have accessible information to consumers, these were all priorities of mine. In fact, the AARP awarded me its Legislative of the Year because of my effort to protect the identities and personal information of seniors. There is more work that we can do. We have to cooperate with federal agencies, the Federal Trade Commission. We can intervene with telecommunications companies that control so much of our data, whether it's in the cloud, to require that they have the highest standards of protection. So technology is just radically, dramatically fast pace. And what we have to have is an Attorney General who has the value and proven record of protecting people's information and will come up with new solutions as technology comes up with new problems, because protecting people's personal information is too critical.
Mr. Newton.
Thank you. I appreciate the question. You know, this is a very serious issue, and it has been an explosion of consumer fraud and identity theft that's gone on the last few years. It's one of the things that I wish that our current Attorney General had been a stronger leader about. My opinion is that we need to work much harder in a team-like manner with federal government and many other states. What I've learned in the last few months is talking to law enforcement officials and others is that this isn't just overseas. This isn't just an overseas organized crime problem. That's a very big part of it. We're now seeing street criminals, street gangs that are moving into this same arena. They've gotten smart and they're doing the same thing. Our current Attorney General has been missing in action on this front. It requires teamwork and it requires leadership. That's what I'm looking forward to bringing to the Department of Justice.
Next question, Annette Jordan, to Josh Stein.
The North Carolina State Crime Lab has experienced problems regarding long wait times for blood alcohol testing, controlled substances testing, and DNA analysis. What skills do you bring to effectively oversee the lab and prevent those problems from occurring again?
The most important thing that I can do as the Attorney General overseeing the State Crime Lab is to fight vociferously to make sure it has the resources it needs to do the job. I wrote the State Crime Lab Capacity Act last year, in which I called for higher salaries for the scientists, because what was happening is the state was training them at the State Crime Lab, and they were immediately getting poached by county and other labs, and we were on a treadmill, training and losing people. It called to hire more lab technicians to take some of the non-scientific work, the administrative work, off the scientists so they can do the actual science. It called for outsourcing toxicology results to private vendors so we could reduce the backlog. And finally, it called for paying for supplies for the new Western Crime Lab that's coming online next year. And Senator Newton was chair of the Justice and Public Safety Committee, Appropriations Committee, from 11, 12, 13, and 14. And there were millions of dollars of requests submitted to that committee by the Crime Lab to ensure that it had the resources to deal with whatever backlogs existed. His committee failed to appropriately appropriate funds to ensure it had those resources. I introduced the bill last year, argued hard with appropriators to get that funded. I am pleased that we are turning the corner. The backlogs are falling. We're being more responsive to law enforcement. And as Attorney General, I will continue to bird dog this issue because it is imperative that as the Crime Lab, we get the evidence back to the criminal justice system, to law enforcement, so that they can prosecute criminals and put bad guys behind bars.
Mr. Newton.
Thank you. I appreciate that question very much. This is one of the main reasons why I'm running for Attorney General. The problems that have been going on at the Crime Lab have been long-standing during the entire reign of our current Attorney General. The backlog there is horrendous. There's a lot of talk about the backlog being eliminated, but that's simply not true. Today, I spent quite a bit of time with 7 sheriffs from the area around High Point and Greensboro. We were talking about the Crime Lab. We had some time to kill. Most of them still have a 2-year waiting period to get simple toxicology reports back. And that's unacceptable. In the last 3 years, we've poured millions of dollars in new money into the Crime Lab. We've provided money for outsourcing. We've created a fund for district attorneys to have their own private outsourcing. We've allowed for private contracting. The current Attorney General uses a lab all the way out of Pennsylvania, but of course there's labs all over North Carolina that could do the work. Not sure why we do it that way, but that's the way that he's chosen to do it. I'm looking forward to changing that. What I think the solutions are, in addition to some resources, we've poured millions of dollars into salaries and equipment, funding the Western Crime Lab. We increased fees on the criminals that would, and the defendants that would require the lab technicians to go away from the lab and come to the courtroom, which is part of what the backlog is. But I believe the solution is going to be teamwork with local law enforcement, with developing regional labs, as well as really boosting the funds for privatizing and outsourcing. We can get a handle on it. My goal, and when I'm Attorney General, we're going to meet this goal, is to have evidence turned around to the courtroom within 30 days.
Mr. Nagy, your next question will be to Buck Newton.
Senator, one of this year's top stories has been, broadly, tension between African American communities and police officers regarding the use of lethal force. Law enforcement training and standards, in addition to the North Carolina Justice Academy, come under your purview as Attorney General. How do you as Attorney General plan to ensure equal treatment of all North Carolina citizens regardless of race, while at the same time making sure law enforcement can effectively do its job?
Thank you for the question. there's a great deal of training that goes on and should go on every single year for every law enforcement officer. Some of these sheriffs I was talking about earlier, I was asking them those questions when they go through live fire exercises and confrontations, regardless of who the assailant may be. These are very important questions, and it's very unfortunate that so many, for political purposes, have decided for political gain to try to vilify our law enforcement. What has happened in Dallas, what has happened in Baton Rouge, what's happened in other states, this is unacceptable. And as Attorney General, I will not stand for it. We have put a lot of new money into training with these basically virtual video live fire scenarios, real live videos of what has happened to help the law enforcement train and get used to these situations. They do it at night, they do it during the day. But I'll tell you, I went on several times. I've been with Highway Patrol on patrol, and it really will wake you up to realize the danger that they are exposed to every single day, every single night that they're on our highways. And the same is true for our deputies and our local law enforcement and police and so forth. And they do not have much time, split seconds sometimes, to make a decision. We have to support them. We have to give them the training, the equipment, and the tools to make sure that every time that it's done right. Unfortunately, sometimes, occasionally, mistakes are made. Everybody is human. But the vast majority of the time, our law enforcement does it right every time. Thank you.
Mr. Stein.
Thank you. The goals of law enforcement is exactly the same goal of people in the community. We all want safe communities where people can live their lives out. They can play on the street. They can have cookouts. People can enjoy their lives. And that's the goal of law enforcement. And it is remarkable what those folks do. I mean, we actually pay them to go into dangerous situations. That's their job. When there's some crisis and the rest of us are running away, law enforcement is paid to run towards the danger. And they have to make tough decisions. And we as a society really need to understand the unique circumstances in which they do their work and give them the tools and support they need to succeed. And I think because of my commitment to law enforcement, I have been endorsed by the 2 police groups, including the state's largest. That said, like any profession, there are bad actors. There are bad police officers, just like there are bad lawyers, there are bad senators, there are bad police officers. And when they do wrong, they need to be held accountable. It goes without saying. Our collective ambition should be to reduce the amount of conflict from citizen on police violence and police on citizen violence. Whatever level it is, it needs to be lower. And we can do that by having effective training. Like you said, the Attorney General is partly responsible for the training of law enforcement. We can ensure that police departments reflect the communities in which they operate, that they're diverse police departments. And we can use technology. If we have body cameras widely distributed throughout our state, that serves to protect law enforcement and the community. It holds both sides accountable. And I am committed to ensuring that we have safe communities. I'm committed to working with law enforcement to give them the tools and the training they need so that they can do their job well for the people.
The next question goes to Buck Newton, asked by Annette Jordan.
The last execution in North Carolina was in 2006. Are you a proponent or opponent of the death penalty? If you oppose the death penalty, how will you represent the state in criminal appeals? If you support it, what do you propose as solutions to getting the process moving again?
Thank you. Yes, I do support the death penalty. It is constitutional, and in many cases, it is unfortunately necessary and appropriate. There are a lot of dangerous, evil people in our world, unfortunately. And there are times when the death penalty is the right decision by a jury when there's been a fair trial. We have a long process in our state to ensure a fair trial. It does not always go right, but if we work hard on our justice system and prosecutors are careful, justice prevails the vast majority of the time. Now, I've worked hard in the Senate to try to move forward with our death penalty protocols. I helped pass legislation which updated our protocols that avoided the problem of how do they get the drugs, for example, for lethal injection, and the way that executions would be carried out. I also worked hard to help repeal a law that Senator Stein helped pass, which was the so-called Racial Justice Act. This was a ridiculous law when you bore down into the facts of what the law did. This law allowed convicted white murderers of law enforcement to appeal their death penalty simply because they said there weren't enough black people on the jury or enough white people on the jury. That was not the intent, supposedly, of the Racial Justice Act. It stymied the ability to carry out the death penalty in the appropriate circumstances, and I'm proud of being a part of repealing it.
Mr. Stein.
Thank you, Kelly. I support the death penalty because there are certain crimes that are so heinous that that is an appropriate punishment. But in carrying out the death penalty, we must ensure that no innocent person is executed and that no one is put to death based on the color of their skin. That's why I supported certain procedures to ensure that those errors don't occur. I support expanding the DNA database. That has led to convicting the guilty and acquitting the innocent. I've supported more resources to the state crime lab so we can turn cases around more quickly. I support the Actual Innocence Commission, which was actually an initiative of a Republican, former North Carolina Supreme Court Justice, I. Beverly Lake, that would allow procedures to go back and look at certain cases post-conviction. And they have found a number of people in our prisons innocent, including someone from death row. So my opponent, for some reason, introduced legislation to abolish the Innocence Commission. Perhaps he can explain why. But our criminal justice system, it goes without saying, must be fair and impartial. As Attorney General, I will enforce North Carolina laws to ensure it is precisely that.
Mr. Stein, I'll direct your attention to John Nagy for the next question.
Gentlemen, you've both previously said that lawmakers shouldn't spend millions of dollars on outside attorneys to defend laws, since that is a major responsibility for the Attorney General's office.
Yep.
Describe how you plan to defend laws that could substantially clash with your personal or political beliefs.
My personal and political beliefs are secondary to my job. My personal and political beliefs are relevant as a state senator. When there is a controversial piece of legislation that's on the floor of the Senate, I stand up and say exactly what I think, and I vote red or green to express my views. The role of Attorney General is different. The role of Attorney General is to defend the state. And so what I will do as Attorney General is I will actively engage the legislature, engage the governor, to try to dissuade them from taking bad decisions, from taking unconstitutional acts. The legislature actually has passed, Senator Newton has voted for 13 separate bills that have been held to be unconstitutional by the North Carolina or federal courts. We need to have somebody in the office who has greater respect for the U.S. and state Constitution as opposed to lip service respect for the Constitution. That's what my job as Attorney General is to respect the Constitution and enforce the law, and that's what I'll do.
Mr. Newton.
Thank you. I appreciate you pointing out lip service, which I think most people know of your support of our current Attorney General's positions on some of the bills that he refuses to defend, and I wonder if that's lip service. I guess the voters will decide in November. This is an important task for the Attorney General to make these decisions. Quite simply, the vast majority of the time, there is no reason for the Attorney General not to be actively involved in the defending of the laws of our state. For me, it's a simple question. Was the law passed in a constitutional manner? In other words, were the constitutional procedures followed? In other words, it wasn't some executive order coming down on high from the White House. This was one chamber introducing a bill, it being passed, a governor signing it, or a governor vetoing and the veto being overridden, and the constitutional procedures have been followed. That's the first key step. If that has been met, the people of North Carolina have spoken. The General Assembly represents the people of North Carolina. That's our constitutional system. Their voice, the people's voice, deserves to be represented and deserves to be defended all the way to the bitter end. It is not appropriate for the Attorney General to wave the white flag in the middle of a case. It is not appropriate for the Attorney General to pretend and pay lip service to defending a case and then finding ways to undermine the case. That's what we've seen here for the last 5 years.
Mr. Stein.
I'm not entirely sure Senator Newton knows what the job of Attorney General is. The Attorney General is responsible for thousands of cases at any one moment. Over the course of a year, tens of thousands. He's talking about one or two cases over a period of 16 years. I want to just talk about the voter ID bill as a perfect example, this anti-voter law. The Attorney General defended that law for 3 years. The legislature spent millions of its own money duplicating those resources. The governor triplicated it by hiring his own counsel. And now that the federal courts have held that it was unconstitutional because it targeted African Americans with surgical precision and was the most restrictive anti-voter law since Jim Crow era, very likely the plaintiff's attorneys will get paid. So because of rash, unconstitutional acts of the legislature, poor decisions by hiring outside counsel, the taxpayer is on the hook for millions and millions of dollars in one case. It's a waste of taxpayer money.
Mr. Newton.
Thank you, and I'm really appreciate Senator Stein bringing back up the voter ID bill because it is the perfect example of the question that you asked. This decision by our current Attorney General is all political. It's a political decision. The U.S. Supreme Court has already upheld voter ID in 2008. Most states have all of the same provisions that are in the North Carolina law. 3 Obama and Clinton appointees on the Fourth Circuit are the only judges who have ruled that law to be unconstitutional. Could it be politics that this is happening on the eve of the 2016 election? I wonder why.
All right, Ms. Jordan, you'll ask the next question of Mr. Stein.
How do you view the Attorney General's discretion in filing or joining multi-state lawsuits that may impact national regulations in industries such as tobacco, pharmaceuticals, the environment, energy, and healthcare?
That is an important tool in the toolkit of the Attorney General. The idea that a lot of these harms that happen to North Carolina people, North Carolina seniors, consumers, they don't occur only in North Carolina. These are big national companies that are doing whatever illegal activity or unlawful activity here in North Carolina. They're doing it in Virginia, and Tennessee, and California, Vermont, New Mexico. And these companies are billion-dollar companies. The Attorney General's office does not have infinite resources. And so we routinely will analyze each case on its own merits to determine, were North Carolina consumers harmed, and were they harmed by activity that violated the law? And if those two answers are yes, then we will look to see what other states, whether they are interested in other states in pursuing that matter. It's a way of preserving taxpayer money. It's a way of teaming up to ensure you have the resources to go after. I mean, when we went after predatory lenders that were abusing consumers, if we had to do that all by ourselves in North Carolina, we would have been overwhelmed. But when we partner with 40, 45 other states, then we have the resources to hold bad actors to account. And there are pharmaceutical companies that are charging too much for their prescription drugs. There are payday lenders. There are telecommunications companies that may be cramming things on our bills. There may be satellite companies that are engaged in illegal marketing activities. Multi-state litigation is incredibly important. It is an important tool for an Attorney General, but to answer your question, how do you make that decision? Are North Carolina people harmed, and was the activity unlawful?
Mr. Newton.
Thank you. I agree that multi-state cooperation at the Attorney General level is critical to protecting the people of North Carolina. My opponent mentioned a lot of things about going and suing businesses. There are also a lot of other reasons why attorneys general would join together to fight, for example, against overreaching federal government and executive orders that might come down from the White House, unconstitutional executive orders, say, on illegal immigration. We have a penchant in Washington, unfortunately, these days for dictating to the states and basically telling the states what to do without going through our constitutional process. There's a separation of powers from the states and the federal government. Many of the agenda items of the current president have been thwarted or have been pushed back or been deemed unconstitutional by coalitions of attorneys general who are willing to push back and fight. Let me give you another example. Just the other day, a coalition of attorneys general led by Patrick Morrissey in West Virginia did Roy Cooper's job in defending the county commissioners of Rowan County and defending their First Amendment right to lead a prayer before they begin their meetings. That decision just came down. That was another one of those court rulings where something was found to be unconstitutional, and they are allowed to have those prayers. But our current Attorney General was nowhere to be found.
Mr. Stein, rebuttal.
Thank you. I have no hesitation for standing up to the federal government when it overreaches. I did that when I was a senior deputy in the Attorney General's office. For instance, the Bush administration tried to make it such that states did not have the authority to protect consumers when banks were engaged in illegal marketing activities or predatory lending. And we fought them in the agencies, we fought them in the courts, and we won. So the idea of standing up to the federal government, that's fine. That is not why I'm running for Attorney General. I'm running for Attorney General to protect North Carolina families. I'm not running to turn this into some ideological partisan office that is going to be used in the same partisan fights that I think are ruining our national politics. I'm here to protect the people, and it's just rich that he's concerned about the overreaching federal government, but he will not hesitate to tell a local government here in North Carolina what it can and can't do to protect its people, like discriminatory HB 2.
Mr. Nagy, your next question to Buck Newton.
Both of you gentlemen are strong individuals and respective party leaders whom we could easily see one day running for governor. It's not original. I believe the joke is that AG stands for aspiring governor. Given that it's been discussed this past year regarding current Attorney General Roy Cooper, what are your respective positions on resigning from office if you set about to run for higher office?
I have no intention of resigning from office of Attorney General to run for higher office. I currently serve as a state senator, and I intend to fulfill my term to the end of this year, which is December, as a state senator, because that's what the people elected me to do, and that's what I told them that I would do. They need representation in the state Senate, and the people of North Carolina would need their Attorney General to be focused on his job of protecting North Carolina citizens, of defending the laws of this state, of defending the Constitution of this state and the Constitution of the United States. The First Amendment is important. Religious freedom is important. The right of free speech is important. And when the federal government or others challenge the First Amendment, that's protecting people of North Carolina when that's challenged in court and the right to pray is upheld. So I appreciate the question because I think the people of North Carolina deserve to know what kind of man, in this case, they're going to have in the Attorney General's office, whether it's going to be an ambitious politician or whether it's someone who is running to protect them.
Mr. Stein.
I was a senior deputy attorney general for 8 years in the North Carolina Attorney General's office. The folks who do the lion's share of the work in the office, they're called Assistant Attorney General, so AAG. So I'd like to say I'm an AAG and then I'm an aspiring Attorney General. And I've got an election in 49 days, and the only thing I'm thinking about is winning this election so that I can serve the people of North Carolina, I can protect the people of North Carolina across this state, I can protect families by cracking down on violent crime and by confronting the opioid epidemic, I can protect our parents and grandparents from telemarketing scammers that are trying to steal their life's wealth, I can protect the taxpayer by going after Medicaid fraud. I want to be Attorney General who stands up for people who do things the right way, people who play by the rules, and I will take on criminals, corrupt politicians, and corporate bad actors when they don't, because no one is above the law. The only thing I'm thinking about is being the best Attorney General for the people of North Carolina I can possibly be.
Ms. Jordan, your next question will go to Buck Newton.
Okay. The Attorney General's office performs valuable functions in support of district attorneys, such as prosecuting cases where the DA's office has a conflict of interest. How will you foster relationships with the state's district attorneys?
That's an excellent question, and I really appreciate it, because the relationship between the district attorneys and the state North Carolina Attorney General is very critical. There should be a lot of cooperation on. The Attorney General's office handles all the appeals of criminal convictions that come out of our trial courts. That's important for the Attorney General's office to be able to work seamlessly with the District Attorney's office in that regard. From time to time, there are conflicts of interest that occur. They may occur for a variety of reasons. For example, in Charlotte, there was a shooting involving a police officer. There was a decision, I think the appropriate one, made by the district attorney there to seek the help of our current Attorney General about whether or not to prosecute that officer. Unfortunately, there's discretion and there's involvement in the Attorney General's office about making decisions. In that case, our current Attorney General, and I think it was for political purposes, made a decision after 2 grand juries. The first grand jury did not indict the officer. They said, no, we don't see anything wrong. The second grand jury managed to find an indictment. You know, sometimes that happens when it comes back for the second time. And they tried the case, and they tried the case to a mistrial. Fortunately, a decision was made in the end not to do it, but they put that officer through a lot. So these are very important decisions about working with the district attorney's office. You know, we have to have funding. We have to have a relationship that is cooperative and understanding. But the biggest impact for the district attorney's office is solving the problem in the crime lab. That's what I'm looking forward to doing.
Mr. Stein.
By the way, my name's Josh Stein, not Roy Cooper. I think you may be running against Roy Cooper. I'm running for Attorney General. The relationship between district attorneys and the Attorney General has to be incredibly close, because the Attorney General, the main relationship is handling the criminal appeals. So the way it works in North Carolina is local district attorneys, who are constitutional officers, they prosecute the trials. Those are, you know, the O.J. Simpson trial, that's a prosecutor. When that case gets appealed to appellate courts, when the person's in jail, the case then goes to the Attorney General's office. So having that strong relationship is essential. I went to the District Attorney Conference in Ocracoke. I've been to the last 2 training of assistant district attorneys. When there are openings in the criminal division in my office, I will look to the district attorney's offices first, because it's imperative that we have a collaborative and relationship built on trust. There is another example of special prosecutions. That's where the local district attorney, where there's a conflict, where they feel like they can't do their job in prosecuting the case, they will refer it to the Attorney General. And there's a small team of about 6 lawyers who will prosecute various cases around the state when the district attorney needs to recuse himself or herself. And I will ensure that we have the right talented lawyers. Those lawyers go to the district attorney conferences to build those relationships. As Senator Newton said, I will fight for the crime lab to make sure it has the resources so that law enforcement, both the investigators, the police and sheriff's offices, can bring the evidence to trial. We can have speedy trials and speedy convictions, or if the evidence doesn't show, then speedy acquittal.
Mr. Stein, I'll direct your attention to Mr. Nagy for the next question.
Thank you.
2 years ago, the legislature moved the SBI under the Department of Public Safety, suggesting it would take politics out of its investigative work. Please assess how you think the change has gone and whether you would advocate relocating the SBI back to the Attorney General's oversight or keeping it in the control of the Department of Public Safety in the Governor's office.
The SBI was created about 75, 76 years ago. It was created within the Department of Justice, just like the Federal Bureau of Investigation is in the U.S. Department of Justice. The State Department of Bureau of Investigation was in the North Carolina Department of Justice. Worked well, served law enforcement, what would happen is when local law enforcement had a major case where there was either forensic or a big murder or some very complicated case, they would ask the SBI to come in and augment local law enforcement to provide investigations in those matters. It stayed in the AG's office with no problem, and in fact, the SBI engaged in a number of investigations of governor's office, governor's administrations, whether it was Department of Public Safety, Department of Transportation, the Highway Patrol, and it didn't matter whether the Attorney General was a Democrat and the governor was a Democrat, those investigations would go forward. I think for very clearly partisan reasons, the Republican legislature took the SBI away from the Democratic Attorney General and moved it to the Republican Governor's Department of Public Safety. This was a move that was opposed by the Sheriff's Association. I was standing with the Sheriff's Association in opposition to this because it has the effect of essentially consolidating, potentially creating a state police force, which I don't think is in the state's interest. As to whether I would advocate for it to be moved back to the Department of Justice once this transition has moved, I don't know that I would advocate for it. Do I think the move should have happened in the first place? Surely not.
Mr. Newton.
Thank you. Yes, I very much supported the move. I was instrumental in the move. I think that speaks volumes about why I did that. I'm here running as Attorney General today. I don't think it should be moved back. What we were after with the move is to take the politics out of the SBI. Unfortunately, there were a lot of instances of political decision-making in the SBI, and very much to the dismay of me and many others in the legislature, we learned of many instances where investigations were not being handled properly for political purposes. That's not acceptable. I have a lot of friends who are with the SBI. They are uniformly thrilled to have been moved out of the Department of Justice. Frankly, it's because there was a lack of leadership there. Our current Attorney General, who I'm not running against, but perhaps I'm running against somebody who's very proud to work for him and happy to tell everybody about that, and maybe somebody who's been very much mentored by him. Our current Attorney General kept appointing political appointees to lead the SBI. Under this arrangement, we have taken the politics out of it. The SBI director is appointed for an 8-year term that will carry over through governorships. And we have encouraged Governor McCrory, and he has twice appointed professional law enforcement to run the SBI. There are still things that need to be worked out, but this unit now works as an independent professional law enforcement agency. It should be the lead law enforcement agency in the state of North Carolina. We did it for morale, we did it for political independence, and we did it to restore the professionalism. And I believe we did the right thing, and I certainly don't think it's time to move it back.
Candidates, time is drawing near. 1-minute answers for the final question. Annette Jordan, you have the honors to Mr. Stein.
All right. Let's talk about something more personal then as your last question. What has been the most significant personal setback that you've ever encountered? How did you overcome it? And what lesson from that will you bring to the AG office?
You have gotten personal on us. I think that it wasn't me personally, it wasn't a close relative, but there is drug addiction in every family. And seeing the impact of drug addiction on relatives can be devastating. And I think that the Office of Attorney General can play an instrumental role in dealing with drug addiction. And I want to highlight in particular opioid addiction because it is becoming an epidemic. More people die from opioid addiction, which is heroin and prescription drugs, Percocets, OxyContin, than die from car crashes today. the Attorney General can be a powerful force of coalescing everybody, whether it's public health, medical community, law enforcement, together to come up with solutions. Drug drops to take back prescription drugs, education programs to teach kids about the dangers of drugs. The list goes on. My time's up.
Mr. Newton, the final minute.
Thank you. I agree with Senator Stein. Opioid addiction is a exploding problem in this state that has, unfortunately, we haven't had strong enough leadership in that area. It's one of the things I'm looking forward to. And drug addiction is something that I've had very close to home in my family, and it is a tragedy. But for me personally, probably the most difficult time was the death of my grandfather, who was my law partner in my law firm for 10 years. I always knew that the day would come, but it was a very difficult time for me personally to make decisions about where I was going and what I needed to do, and I learned a lot from that experience. You know, we've all experienced death in our families, but that one for me particularly was deep and had a huge impact on me.
Thank you, candidates. Let's move to closing statements by coin flip. Mr. Newton, you give the first closing statement, 3 minutes maximum.
Well, thank you. Thank you. We've heard tonight a very clear contrast in values and vision for North Carolina. You know, my opponent doesn't want to talk too much about his troubling record as a far-left liberal in the North Carolina State Senate. He avoided talking about a lot of those things. He didn't want to talk too much about his efforts to help first-degree murderers escape the death penalty. And he certainly didn't want to talk about raising taxes on just about everything that you or I might buy when he was in the majority with $1 billion tax increase. He frankly wants you to think that he's fighting for you. I think most of North Carolina has seen that act before and understands the difference of what you have before you. You may not agree with me on everything, but you can count on me to protect the rule of law in this state. When our current Attorney General, dropped the ball defending Jessica's law, I went to work immediately this summer in the Senate to update the law and ensure that convicted child predators would never be allowed on playgrounds, rec centers, and other places where children gather, like state fairs. And just a few days ago, local law enforcement locked up 2 convicted sex offenders who showed up at the Mountain State Fair. And it shows the law is working. That only happened because I went to work after our current Attorney General dropped the ball on the appeals. To most of you, that's probably good common sense. But it's a clear example that even a law protecting our children from predators is under attack these days. In the Senate, I fought to protect vulnerable residents of group homes from abuse. I named that law after Bert Powell, a young man from Conover who was abused by the very people who were supposed to be taking care of him. Now, there's no excuse for staying silent if you see abuse, and you will be punished today if you do. There are more stories like these that are waiting for an Attorney General who will put your interests ahead of his own, who will get to work cleaning up the backlog of the rape kits that haven't even been sent to the crime lab, and who will not look the other way to corruption and political favoritism. Today, I ask for your support and I ask for your vote. If you will put me to work for you as your Attorney General, I pledge that with God's help, I will serve with integrity and live up to your trust. I will stand up to anyone who would do you harm, and I will never waver in my support of our law enforcement. If elected as your Attorney General, you won't have to wonder where I will stand when political correctness turns up the heat. I will have your back. I will be honored to fight for you as your Attorney General. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newton. Mr. Stein, the final word.
I want to thank everybody involved with tonight's debate. I think it's been very illustrative in showing the sharp contrast between my opponent and me in terms of the experience, the values and priorities, and the independence we will bring to this office. First experience, before getting elected to the state Senate, I served as a senior deputy attorney general for 8 years, protecting North Carolina families. I took on big banks that were engaged in predatory lending, big utilities, monopoly utilities that were trying to raise your utility rates. I took on pharmaceutical companies that were trying to increase the cost of your drugs illegally. I know the job of Attorney General. I am ready to go from the first day. My opponent has not worked a day in the Office of Attorney General, nor a day as a criminal prosecutor. Second, priorities and values. My vision of North Carolina is a welcoming, prosperous state where businesses, families, people, they can thrive, where we're open for business. My opponent's signature legislative act was to be the leading Senate champion for discriminatory House Bill 2 that has cost our state thousands of jobs and hundreds of millions of dollars. Just last week, we learned that the ACC and the NCAA were pulling their championships out of North Carolina. North Carolina is the home of the ACC, for goodness sakes. His bill is not only wrong, but it is bad for business and it is damaging to our reputation. Third, independence. Who is funding his campaign? More than 90% of the paid communications from his campaign comes from an out-of-state, big money super PAC in Washington, D.C. that is already attacking me. They are going to spend $4 million at least here in North Carolina trying to buy this election for Senator Newton. That is more money than has ever been spent by an outside super PAC to buy an attorney general's race, put in an attorney general race in the history of the United States. It tells you two things. One, they got a candidate who they desperately want to be their attorney general. And two, they want to defeat our campaign because they know I will fight for you, not them. I am Josh Stein. I am running for Attorney General to protect North Carolina families. I think that I have the experience, the values and priorities, and the independence to serve you well. I ask for your vote. With your support, we will elect an Attorney General who puts the people of North Carolina first, and we can make our state safer and stronger. Thank you for your attention.
A hand for our candidates, Buck Newton and Josh Stein. And I want to thank you for watching this Attorney General's debate, sponsored by the Institute of Political Leadership and the Asheboro-Randolph Chamber of Commerce. Thanks so much for watching. Good night.
Funding for the North Carolina Institute of Political Leadership Hometown Debate is provided by viewers like you, with additional funding provided by North Carolina's Electric Cooperatives, the John William Pope Foundation, State Employees Association of North Carolina, North Carolina Association of Defense Attorneys, and North Carolina Advocates for Justice.